Hello, everybody at home. Thanks for tuning in to our weekly poetry series. I'm Nicole, the manager at It Again Bookstore, and I'm joined today by poets Edgar Kunz and Tiana Clark. You can buy their books Tap Out and I Can't Talk About the Trees Without the Blood at Read It Again, and we'll post links to those in the comments. The way the formatting is going to work, each poet will read and then we'll have a discussion. Tonight's topic, I believe, will center around family and fathers, and it may be something that a lot of people have connections to. We're going to begin with Edgar. He's going to read first. Edgar Kunz is the author of the poetry collection Tap Out, a New York Times New and Noteworthy book. Originally from New England, Edgar lives in Baltimore, Maryland, where he teaches at Goucher College and in the Newport MFA at Salve Regina University. He is a graduate of Vanderbilt University's MFA program and has received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the MacDowell Colony, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and Stanford University, where he has a Wallace Stegner Fellow. He is working on a book of poems about love and late capitalism. All right, Edgar, Kim's going to make you big on the screen, and then you can.
Cool. Hi. This is so strange. I've never done an e-reading before, so I can't see any of you, but you can see me. I'm gonna read some poems from this book, Tap Out. So cool I'm getting texts from people as I'm reading. I'm getting roasted via text. Okay, so cool to be here with Tiana, who I love and whose work I love. And thank you so much to Read It Again for having us, putting this thing together. I'm gonna read just a couple poems from Tap Out, and I'm gonna read some new stuff. I'll start with the first poem in the book. That's how I like to start my readings. It's called After the Hurricane. I used to work on a I used to work on a farm in upstate Maryland, and Hurricane Sandy came through and knocked down a bunch of trees and fence line, and so my job for a while was cleaning up after that hurricane. And about the same time, I found out through some family members that my dad was living in a van in Connecticut. And so this poem sort of mashes those two things together. Although the poem used to be much longer and about farming, and now the hurricane and the farm are totally cut out of the poem, so the title doesn't make any sense anymore. Whatever. After the Hurricane. 300 miles north, my father beds down in a van by the Connecticut River. Snow tires rim deep in the silt. He has a wool horse blanket tacked inside the windshield, a pair of extra pants bunched into a pillow. He has a paper bag of partially smoked butts, a paw sox cap, a Zippo. He has state-sponsored cell phone minutes and a camo jacket hung on the side view to dry. He can see the Costco parking lot through the trees, swelling and emptying out. He wants to fix things with his wife. He wants a couch to crash on. He wants a drink. He wants sex. He has a few cans of kidney beans and a tin of ShopRite tuna. Wrinkled plastic piss bottles line the dash. Sometimes he walks out to the river and lets the wind sift his lank and matted hair. Sometimes he peels his socks and stands in the murky current and thinks about his wife, the birthmark on her neck, her one toe longer than the others, her freckled hands. He tries to hold her hands in his mind. He tries to remember the birth years of his sons. He tries to make sense of the papers he signed, the icy water wetting the hem of his pants, the river stones sharp underfoot, the wind. I hold him like this in my mind all afternoon. Obviously, this book came out before coronavirus and the subsequent stay-at-home orders and stuff, but there's a poem in it that feels now like it's speaking to the kind of life that we're all having to live a life of isolation and aloneness, having to deal without the proximity of other people and the support of other people. This poem is called Farm Sitting. It's almost at the very end of the book. Farm Sitting. Most days the same with minor variations. Flat blue of the 5 a.m. kitchen. 2 scoops of feed in a plastic bucket. A small bowl of yogurt and an hour stacking what the ice brought down overnight. I was happy. I slept in their bed. I read the mysteries on their shelves. Always something precious gone. Someone hot on the trail. I walked in borrowed boots across the frozen pasture and back each morning the feed, the spigot, the horse dragging its bulk along the stall. I'd walk out nights and stand on the same trampled spot in the yard and listen to the cold stirring in the cheatgrass, dull glow of a town on the horizon, hiss of snow. I'd lie in their bed under 3 heavy cotton blankets and worry about the horse and the dwindling supplies. It was a life, and it was not mine. To sleep, I imagined the great slabs of granite buried slantwise in the hills. To sleep, I counted the measures ticked out in the porcelain tub, slow drip to keep the pipes from freezing. I'm going to read one more from the book. Shout out to my mom, who's great, who's a lovely person, and who doesn't get enough airtime in this book that ends up being kind of dominated by my father. For good reason. She's lovely and more or less an uncomplicated figure in my life, and my father was extremely complicated. So shouts to my mom. I don't know if you're watching. I can't tell who's watching, but love you very much. And this poem is for you. It's called Salvage. Still somewhere in me the summer spent driving steel into the wet earth. Heft and swing of the mattock, my blistered hands, black flies rising like steam. The tables I served, the law firms I hustled from one zipline to another, classroom where I taught economics to the medicated kids of bus drivers and stevedores, swept clean boulevards of the city that paid me to snap a picture of every downtown business, jot the names and hours in a spiral-bound book. Somewhere in me, the failed industrial towns of New England with their posh English names, Weymouth, Bridgeport, Lowell, Worcester, their dead cars, their factories and silk mills converted and upsold to commuters, somewhere the 3rd floor walk-up we lived in longest. Cracked plaster and single pane, plastic paneling painted to look like real wood. And my stepmother, my real mom, bending over the glossy stack of Star Market mailers, hands thin, approximate, bright scars on the backs of her wrists where the surgeries didn't take. And me, problem kid, with a mushroom cut, and his shirt tucked into his sweats, clipping the dollar-offs, the half-offs, the buy one, get ones, the buy one, get twos, the store-issued doublers, shoulder to shoulder on the kitchen floor in the afternoon, stretching on into no kind of heaven I could have understood then, of peeling linoleum and the drone of interstate traffic, of WIC checks, name-brand knockoffs, the gray stamps card made to pass as a regular visa, where we are allowed to know exactly what we can have and keep and what it will cost. Cool. So those were some poems from Tap Out. Buy them at buy a copy at Read It Again if you feel moved to buy a copy. Thanks again for hosting us, y'all. I'm going to read, I think, 2 new poems. I realized only after I had finished Tap Out, finished writing it, that I had written a series of season poems, something mud season, dry season. And so I've kept that up after the book is over. This poem is called Shoulder Season, and shoulder season is the term for the time in between tourist seasons, right? It's not the on season or the off season, it's sort of the in between season. And so they named it Shoulder Season. This is also about a job that I had working on an island off the coast of New Hampshire in the Isles of Shoals called Star Island. Shoulder Season. A few weeks in, I begin to get a feel for it. Cutting glass from sheets wide as twin beds to replace the island's blown out panes. I drag a scoring knife along the Sharpie line, slide a pencil under, and let each plate fall gently so they break clean and will fit the new space. I go from cottage to empty cottage, thumbing the glazing, hiding the seams. Cormorants on the far rocks shaking out their wings and calling. Late sun striking the Atlantic like a gong. Running out of windows, I slow my pace, make sloppy cuts I know won't fit. I toss them in the bin and order more sheets from Portsmouth, then spend the day imagining fresh glass riding out on the single-engine boat, nested with cotton blankets in the hull. How long can I go on not finishing? The radio says falls last longer and longer now. The weather could hold. I think it's also kind of a post-book poem, right? It's a poem about how, I don't know, it seems to be now a poem about how the ideal state is not to be finished with anything, right? Is to be constantly in process and never quite done. Finishing a book sucks, you know? Working on a book is pretty fun. Okay, so I also started writing poems about California now that I don't live there anymore. I miss it terribly. Shouts to anyone that's living in California right now. I lived in Oakland for a while. I mean, San Francisco first, and then Oakland for some years, and now I can't stop writing about it. This is a poem called Night Heron. I don't know if folks know what a night heron is, but it's a very small. It is a heron technically, but it's a very small kind of hunched bird, and not not as elegant as you might imagine, heron to connote. But they're all around this lake in Oakland called Lake Merritt, which is where my sweetheart Katie and I lived together when we lived there, and so it became kind of a mascot for us and for our love. It's called Night Heron, and this is the last poem that I'll read. I'm really excited to hear Tiana read her poems, and thank you so much for being here. Night Heron. What now? You'd flown in from a Midwest city named for its rowdy summertime abundance, lying, saying you were coming to visit friends in San Francisco. And I had taken the train from chilly Oakland to meet you, and we rode north, carefully not touching. I took you to the tiny one-bedroom apartment I had escaped to after a bad breakup and fried us nervously some potatoes in a cast iron pan, a little rosemary, which we did not eat because you kissed me hard. And we went in a rush to the mattress I bought off a guy in a semi-famous band, and had only the day before gotten off the floor and onto the pinewood bed frame I found and hoisted on my back and carried down out of North Berkeley, arms wide, weaving through the side streets, towing the center line to avoid snagging the Buckeyes leaning out. It was about suffering in public. It was dramatic, sure, but the dramas of my life those days were pitched as high as I could stand, higher sometimes. I said, breathless, I want to taste you. And you said, please, yes. And later, at the edge of the lake, huddled against the damp wind, hot grease soaking through a paper bag, licking salt from each other's fingers obscenely, a night heron peered up at us from the reeds, small, hunched, dipping its shining beak in the shallows, not particularly beautiful, but a heron nevertheless, the same one we were sure we saw perched on the awning outside the theater, whose marquee shouted slogans like, "We live in a fake democracy," and "Prevent unwanted presidencies with hand counting counted paper ballots. And later, the cabin we rented with friends in Calaveras, snow melt, vaulting the redwoods to magnificent heights, drinking rye, and each of us practicing our best wolf howl at the waning moon, which was silly, yes, but once we started, it became impossible to stop, waking up next morning hoarse and happy. And later, you moved west, and we lived together in a ground floor apartment anyone walking past could see into. And later, my father died, and at almost the same age yours did, and both from drink and an unnameable sadness. I went back to Connecticut alone. 3.5 days, my mother said, before anyone had found him in his apartment on the far side of town. And going with my brother, which we should not have done, and dragging the mattress out, and clearing the maggots off the ceiling with a shop vac, and so on. And later, you came, and we walked through the basement of my mother's house. I wanted to show you where for a while he lived, and how. And you slung your arm around my waist, and we moved slowly together, bare fluorescent bulb shining on the Budweiser ashtray, the carpentry tools I would inherit, the ratty couch he crashed on for years. You held up an old calypso record he loved and sang out softly, jump in the line, rock your body in time. And I sang back softly, okay, I believe you. Dancing a little together in the musty half light, and after a while, Mom at the top of the stairs shouting, what are you kids doing down there? And climbing the steps, you pinch my elbow and ask, are you okay? And I hear myself say, yes, which is not a lie, though I'm not listening. I'm letting myself feel how astonishing what our love can make of a place like that. Thanks.
That was really good. Thank you. The pacing of that last one is so good.
Thanks.
Yeah, hi, Edgar.
Well, Tiana's going to read next before we have our conversation. So I'll go ahead and introduce her. Tiana Clark is the author of I Can't Talk About the Trees Without the Blood, which won the 2017 Agnes Lynch Starrett Prize, and the chapbook Equilibrium, selected by AFO Michael Weaver for the 2016 Frost Place Chapbook Competition. She won the 2020 Kate Tufts Discovery Award, the 2017 Furious Flowers Gwendolyn Brooks Centennial Poetry Prize, and the 2015 Rattle Poetry Prize. She was the 2019 National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellow, a recipient of a 2019 Pushcart Prize, and the 2017 to 2018 J.C. and Ruth Hall's Poetry Fellow at the Wisconsin Institute of Creative Writing. She got her bachelor's in Africana and Women's Studies from Tennessee State University and her MFA from Vanderbilt. Her writing has appeared in or is forthcoming from The New Yorker, Poetry Magazine, The Washington Post, VQR, Tin House Online, Kenyon Review, and elsewhere. She teaches creative writing at Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. Here's Tiana.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate Read It Again Bookstore. And yes, please, if you're able to support our books in a great independent bookstore, please buy our books there. Edgar, that was such a beautiful reading. And when I was asked to do this, it was automatic yes when I heard it be with Edgar. We've kind of matriculated together in life with grad school and, you know, post MFA fellowships and first teaching jobs, and we've kind of leaned on each other a lot. It's really special to be here with you, Edgar. And thank you all for people that are joining in. I'm going to start off with a new poem called Broken Ode for the Epigraph. I love epigraphs. I wanted to start off with a poem that gives me a lot of joy, especially in this kind of uncertain time that's filled with so much kind of existential dread, that this poem gives me a lot of joy to read. So I'm working on my next collection, which has to do with a lot of long poems that kind of circle around this idea of kind of longing and desire. Broken Ode for the Epigraph. And it starts with an epigraph from Erica L. Sanchez, which reads, "Who gave me permission to be this person? Oh, intertextuality, oh, little foyer to my poem, oh, little first and foremost, my amuse-bouche, meaning mouth amuser, a little glimpse of the meal to come, and sushi, little epigraphs over rice, and if I could, I would add an epigraph over everything. Wait, who says I can't? I've always been too much, and I'm just now beginning to cherish this too muchness, booming late Baroque rococo in my chest, little shells of scattered light, decorating the caves in my poems. I wish people came with little epigraphs tacked on their foreheads. A little foreshadow couldn't hurt. I wish fruits had a few ripe lines above their clue numbers, a little sneaky peeky of the pulp to come. Oh, little cup holder for my quotes. I love how you hover over the house of my poem like a cloud from another book or a bite from another lover, a way to say I just couldn't help myself here. See, I cut out these lines for you like fuzzy flower stems severed at an angle, and they were briefly dead until I placed them in a vase on top of my poems, prolonging their life again. Such mock. Because if anything, the epigraph is a little clay container of water, and I placed these blossoms in a vase of life juice because you are visiting the home of my poem, and I want you to feel special. And I think fresh cut flowers might make people feel sacchariferous. At least they do for me, especially when my mother-in-law walks barefoot into her gorgeous garden and snips the long lit stems from the sun-bursting forsythia bush, even though we haven't talked in months, even though I wrote a poem about her that hurt her, a poem that started with an epigraph from Natasha Trethewey, and we talked about it over email and then over coffee, and then there was forgiveness, both sides. That was it. See the flowers. I've always deeply loved Natasha Trethewey's work because her parents are like my parents, Black mom, white dad, another type of epigraph, right? Do you understand what kind of permission that releases inside of me? Do you understand how cellular and specific? Sometimes it's important to know about the blood before the poem starts. Who makes up these rules about procedure anyway? I come from clutter. I feel safe under that little liminal space below the title, underneath the stairs, before the first line. Toy Derricott writes, I am not afraid of memoir. Yes, I feel such great affection for Toy Derricott because she has a similar first name as my grandmother, but spelled differently. And also because she drew her beloved dead fish Telly in my copy of The Undertaker's Daughter, writing, Telly loves you, with the bubbles and everything. Well, then I'm not afraid to be the epigraph, damn it. I'm joyfully trying to break every rule about poem making that I know. I want to wake up and like myself more. I want to wake up and like myself more. I want to wake up and like myself more and believe it each time I repeat it. I want to revel in my poems the way Danica Kelly does. Have you heard Danica talk about poems? Do it. Absolute pleasure. I want more of that giddy precision. I want to wake up and address myself like the badass motherfucking epigraph that I am. Hello, epigraph! I'm beginning my body before my body begins. I want to start my day with somebody else's words. For example, this morning, I started with Ross Gay's The Book of Delights, and I keep grinning and underlining words like delight radar and delight muscle, and that image of stacking delights like pancakes, and I can hear Ross's voice as I read them, his joyous timbre almost seems shouting inside these smile-inducing sentences which linger over the blue length of my day. And I just got back from AWP in Portland, where I heard Jose Oliveira say, lean into length, on a panel about poetry podcasts. I wrote it down, and underneath his words scribbled, possible epigraph. Epigraph, a little foreplay, a little playful forest. I'm safe now, so I can play. A little forecast of my mood and tone, a little incantation, little wordy satellites in the white spaces orbiting the sky pallor of my poems. Epigraph my father I've never met, but how I meet and let him go at the beginning of every poem that I write. And isn't lost perpetually dripping sap from the injured trees bruised or cut in our knuckles as we write. Sticky sap spilling from the wound, pitching to survive the bites. And aren't we all writing the same damn poem over and over again anyway? Didn't Jack Spicer allude to that once by translating Lorca? I want to go back to that first epigraph. The easy association would be God, right? Like this. So God coos above the waters of the pre-world, scanning over all that gooey potential, a bajillion possibilities, millions of us already there, little epigraphs in the making, gleaming in that first sentence struck light. The imperative big bang of God's never-ending breath. But what if that first epigraph wasn't so spectacular? What if it was just someone messaging me on one of those spit in a tube DNA websites, saying that they're my second cousin, saying they know how to get in touch with my dad? Oh, the sheer possibility, I cried. Saying that they gave him my number and email address, saying they told him I didn't want or need any money, but how he still never reached out. One thing that I think Edgar and I have a kinship for is deep-seated daddy issues. So with that, normally I think I'd hear laughter there, but it's okay. I'm just going to imagine it. I wanted to read an older poem from my chapbook, Equilibrium. It's called A Blue Note for Father's Day. Because I don't know where you are, I send you a letter of tree leaves. I heard this morning harmonizing like emerald waves above a pond. I send you John Coltrane, who locked himself in a room of amethysts for days with no food or mercy to write a love supreme. We destroy ourselves for splendor, emerging from the buried deep like cicada song to mate and disappear again. Today, I will not be bitter about this holiday or the Facebook post. No, today I send you a roofless church, a grotto with fuzzy moss and trickling water that sounds like wet piano keys. Please know I've made good with my life. With or without you, I know how to kneel before imperfect men. I know this pond can carry cold morning skin like blue notes pressed from warm saxophone buttons for acknowledgement, resolution, pursuance, and psalm. Dear Father, I hope you know that I can love the absence of a thing even more than the thing itself, that I can have one day a year that doesn't beat like the rest. There is no number in my phone to call. There is no home with his face I remember, just a place called nowhere, and this is where I find and lose him like a savior. I'm going to read an oldie but a goodie. I haven't read this poem in a very long time. It's called A Psalm for the One. I used to date someone back in the day that was like in a Christian male group pop band. You can text me later. You know the top ones. A Psalm for the One. Oh, taste and see David's lips, his mouth a crucifix for my wet begging. When he sang worship songs, I emptied my pockets, my purse, and let down my hair for a tenth of his blue gaze. The Lord said he was the one, so church girls bought wedding dresses. Oh, to be saved by a man who could sing like that. Slippery vocal runs, warm on fingertips, melting sin. I never sought to be like the stupid girls, but when he grabbed my crotch, I said yes. An altar for his drossy hands was my body. I became the Easter poinsettias too, open and red, shiny with lacquer. Yes, to curry that laced our tongues with yellow spice. We laid in bed and burped and laughed all night. We saw a couple having sex in a car. He stayed and watched as they watched him. I held his hand on the streets walking home. Thought I heard a voice say he was the one, but the summer wind can mimic almost any wish. A grown man crying in my car. A grown man picking a speck of black pepper from the wet groove of my gums with a toothpick like wheedling a soft prayer, amen. He almost destroyed New York, but I didn't want New York anyway. Amen. How every tug and tuff was a bite that drew no blood. Amen. The last email said I was just a really good friend, a sister in Christ. Amen. We slowly gnawed at the savior of desire, a valley of dry humping that made raw heat but no spark, Selah. And when he wasn't singing, I was lying with my body, and when there was no more milk, I left him. But in some ways, I'm still walking down this aisle on my knees. I just saw that my mom's in here. So, hey, Mom. Okay, I'm going to read some from I Can't Talk About the Trees Without the Blood. And again, support your local independent bookstores at Read It Again or near you. I'll read BBHMM, channeling Rihanna, my lavender suit. I don't know if you can see the whole thing. It's all lavender, baby. Also, I saw that Edgar had on a kind of a purple scarf. So I feel like we didn't try to coordinate, but we did a little bit. BBHMM, after watching the music video. I too want to be naked, zebra striped, and the almost dried accountant's blood, sticky and sucking a fat blunt inside a Louis Vuitton suitcase brimming with the newest money. This is another way to see myself too, and the way Rihanna nooses a white woman up by her smooth feet, a blue-blooded pendulum swaying as her beautiful tits look more perfect than ever. Why did that image excite me so? No, not the tits, but the simulated lynching. It feels so damn delicious to say bitch better have my money inside my mouth. I hate it when people talk about Black artists being capitalists. Why can't we thrive in something rich and green too? And let us be loud about it. Let us be loud with consequence. Remember when we were dating, I wanted you to pay for every meal. And yes, the movies taught me that love was someone reaching for the check first. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Someone has to pay with the fruit from their body. Yeah, I'm spreading my legs for someone else because I'm hungry and always at the end of some kind of altar. Even now, I'm paying for my doctor to reach and scrape inside me to say I don't have cancer. She tells me I need to start thinking about babies because of my age. I think, bitch, I'm not ready. There will always be tithes and offerings. At my church, they called it first fruits. My mother gave me quarters, and as a kid, I waited for the clink at the bottom of the bucket being passed. I believe God heard this too. Somewhere, someone is counting the cash behind a velvet curtain. Once, a boy said, "Suck it, bitch," with his heavy, dense hand at the back of my head. Pushing is another way to mean pay me what you owe me. I didn't forget. Yeah, I see the total at the bottom of the receipt. I have so much debt. I am forever in the wettest bread. Midnight to 3 a.m. I glare at my husband snoring and think of mulatto house slaves. Not all of them, just the ones that might have looked like me and were petrified like me to touch themselves down there, down where it's burnt and swollen, to worship that weak part of me that's cream, to hunger the part of me that's white matter separated, the forgotten phonics of blood. Thickening the room with red platelets, I close his mouth, I clap my hands, I turn him over to stop and start myself. Trying to think how much time is left. I've been going. Okay. I'm going to read Rituals, and it starts with the epigraph from Stuart Diebeck, which reads, "What does it matter? We may not doing it, I wonder." The most dangerous game for me is sex and syntax. Your hand, so familiar and terrifying as family, reaches for my name, and then my navel, which is a cup of hunger. Always in that order. My hand drags after lost, after some inexact past. The wet mood lingers erotic with the scent of a half-peeled orange, broken by a nasty thumbnail. The moment clicks and disappears again before we attempt release. This hardened honey, this slow drip of joy. Another spider approaches and then I smash it, smearing gorgeous little guts like black lotion. Strange how desire is greedy and silent in stasis. Strange how two bodies can grow without branches. And again, how do you diagram two broken bodies without parsing, without penetration? Is this still what I want? Another year, another sip of good bourbon, neat and decadent. Something like a lock unlatches. Another hard world approaches without water. Another hard world approaches without fur. Another hard world approaches and approaches without punctuation, enters without sucking salt from these two bodies, starved and pulsating on the brink of so much touching and not touching. I ache for grammar when it's bent and fluid. I ache for him, for her, and then for myself, always in that order, last and lest. I hum, I bang, I bite, I touch myself, my many selves. If I whimper, can I call it God? Oh God, please delay the verbs. Once, in bed, you finally gave me what I wanted, but I didn't want it anymore. The whipped cream slid from your cool nipples in strings of white tears. See, I'd already eaten so much sugar that day. I was so full and sick of it. I'll end with this poem. It's actually in the collection. It's called Mixed Bitch. Thank you for loving that poem. And thank y'all again for watching. I appreciate the support. Mixed Bitch is allowed to love herself. She wants to tell Nikki Finney about her beautiful black girl arms, how they shimmer and shimmy in space, making muscle songs of her tendons and the dark matter beef. Mixed Bitch wants to commission Kehinde Wiley. She wants Renaissance prints behind her mulatto skin, gold lame, and a big-ass frame inside the Frist Museum. She was caught between two allegiances, different yet the same, herself, her race, the thing that bound and suffocated her. Whatever steps she took, or if she took none at all, something would be crushed. Mixed Bitch don't know her daddy. Mixed Bitch don't know her daddy. Mixed Bitch don't know her daddy. But ain't she still allowed to love herself? Mixed Bitch lets herself love the black inside, the white inside, the black of herself. Thank you.
That was very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now we're going to open it up to a discussion. And if anybody has any questions or comments for either Edgar or Tiana, just post them in the comments of Facebook or YouTube, and we'll be able to see them and respond to them here. But you guys feel free to have a conversation about craft and fathers and family.
Yeah, we were E and I were talking earlier just about, daddy issues and kind of the idea of the father poem. And, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Edgar. Your dad is something that you write about, but also some other poets that you look to. I know for me, I look to, Sharon Olds' book, The Father, Natasha Trethewey, how she talks about, her dad, especially in the poem, Elegy, like as she's writing that poem, she was just like, I was that ruthless, right? Like she's having the memory with her fishing and realizing that she's going to write about this kind of really brutal moment with her father. So those are some key poets that I kind of look to. Or thinking about Neruda's questions, he often kind of brings in the father as well. So love to know your thoughts about it.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. One of the first books I think of is The Father by Sharon Olds, which is a devastating and brutal book. There are moments where she seems to be taking pleasure in the father's pain and the father's suffering. Right. And that's a tough space to try to inhabit in a poem and keep the reader with you. Right. Keep the reader reading and interested in what you have to say. But yeah, of course, my father figures, pretty largely in the book. He's sort of the star that the poems orbit around. Even if they're not about him, they're kind of about him. You say this at the beginning of one of your poems, and I can't talk about the trees without the blood, right? So about the father. The father is sort of the secret subject of all my poems, right? The father is always what's at stake. Yeah. Is that what you said? Yeah. The father is always what's at stake, which I feel in this book especially, right? I'm trying to move away from that kind of that gravitational force in newer poems, although you wouldn't know it, I guess, listening to Night Heron, right, where he is somehow still sneaking in there. But what's most striking to me now, looking at all those poems that I wrote about my father from a great distance, right? Like I had to leave home, I had to start kind of a totally different life to be able to say anything about him or anything about, the way that I grew up. What's most striking to me now is that the poems seem to be grieving him before he's even gone. He died a year and a half ago now, but he was alive for the whole time I was writing the book, right? And so it's been interesting to realize that writing all those poems was at least in part a way of preparing myself for the loss of him, right? Preparing myself for the grief, like starting to do that work that I was going to have to do later.
Yeah, makes me think about, there's a quote from Adrienne Rich, so I'm going to screw up royally, but this is a Tiana paraphrase where it's like, I go to poetry to write what I don't know, what I know.
Yeah.
Like prescient, there's like this weird, dreamy, inchoate, sometimes pre-knowledge that we have that we're writing into, so like
exactly.
You're pre-grieving before the grieving actually happens. And I think also when you have a strained relationship with any family member, there's always that kind of living death even before the death even happens.
Totally. Yeah. Ideally, you're setting that part of your mind loose in a poem, right? Yeah. And the poem is doing stuff that you don't even consciously understand at the time.
Yeah. One thing I think about writing about any family member, regardless, we all have mommy, daddy issues, whatever, is that they become mythic, right? Like I think of Natalie Diaz as my brother is an Aztec. Like, of course, she's writing about the brother, but the brother is a mythic character. And I think one thing that I think I've learned from your work is that, it's a collection of imagined and real experiences that we're kind of writing into. So even though we're writing from these close to the bone experiences, we're obviously using, craft techniques and imaginative techniques to kind of get or Larry Levis says, we're lying to dazzle to get to a closer kind of truth in those, which kind of can free you up to write about kind of harder family issues, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I talk about this now a lot in interviews and in essays and stuff. I don't believe in having to tell the truth in poems at all, right? But I do believe in not misleading the reader, right? There's a difference between sticking to the facts and telling the truth, right? Getting to some essential, I don't know, it's hard not to use the word truth again, but something that feels utterly essential about what it is to be a human being and to be in complex relationship with other people. So at any point in the writing of a poem, I'm making the choice that I think is best for the poem. Yeah. Not the choice that's truest to the facts of this situation, right? And I think my poems got a lot better when I realized that I didn't have to be a journalist. I'm not writing an article for a newspaper, right? I'm trying to make the best poem that I can. And sometimes that means, we talked about this earlier, right? Messing around with time, right? Moving things around in time, transporting events from one place to another. All that stuff, from where I stand, is fair game.
Yeah. If anything, I'm trying to get out of the poem's way, or I'm trying to get my ego out of the way and let the poem kind of reveal itself to me, and let the emotional truth kind of emerge. Sometimes the truth is boring, honestly. Like the real truth was actually really boring.
Or it's too dramatic, you know, it's too on the nose. There's a lot of stuff that I couldn't write about my dad and about how I grew up because it was too like, it was too extreme. Right. And so I had to sort of dial some stuff back and make certain characters more complex or, you know, make the dynamics between people more complex. And that's a kind of lying, right? I mean, I am sort of lying, but in the service of saying something true.
Yeah, I will say too, I think I was reading Helen Vindler said this, or another, I can't remember the poet, saying something like, even if I write about a teacup, it's still going to be about my mom. So like, even if we, like, we're always going to be, it'll always be the poem about our father, right?
Yeah.
We can't ever escape these subjects. I remember interviewing Ross Gay about Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, and I said, you know, you've been writing about your father in these 4 books. I had, you know, whenever you're introducing someone, you go back to their whole collection. And he kind of was like a little bit like, oh, are you like dragging me? Like I'm basically still writing. And I'm like, no, I've just noticed that there's father poems, and now they're in this book that's smashing the Ode and Elegy together. And he was like, yeah, it's always going to be a concern that circles around in my. And I think there's this inclination as early writers are like, oh, am I still talking about this?
Yes.
For my, instead of saying like, no, actually lean into it.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to cut yourself off. We all are given a certain set of flood subjects, and the more I try to run away from them, the more they just kind of barrel me down.
They chase you. Yeah, exactly. I know we both know Eduardo Corral, right? I called him up before I was trying to put together a manuscript to send to publishers. And I was like, Eduardo, I'm freaking out. All my poems are about my dad. And he was like, that's great. Like, that's awesome. That's the spine of your book, right? Like, people would feel really lucky to have like a central concern like that anchoring the book. And that changed the way I think about my own obsessions. You know, they're actually to my, I hope to my advantage.
Yeah. That makes my therapist busy.
We did have a question in the comments. Shelley wants to know how you guys both got started in poetry.
Oh yeah.
Okay. There's mom saying things. Okay. You don't want to go first, Edgar, or me?
I'll go first. I'm a failed songwriter. I mean, I took a community college class in poetry after high school because I thought, well, maybe it would help me with the songs that I'm trying to write, you know? And then I caught the bug. Shout out to Steve Straight at Manchester Community College, my first poetry professor, and a huge early encourager of me trying to live a life in language. I still have, you know, every time I get tired of trying to write a poem or I feel discouraged, I'm like, I'm going to go back to music. I never will, right? But it's nice to have a little, I don't know, side dream or whatever.
I had no idea you were a songwriter.
Well, allegedly, theoretically, right? But it was funny living we both lived in Nashville at the same time. And whenever I would say I'm a writer, people would be like, oh, cool. Have I heard anything of yours on the radio? And I'm like, no, I write poems that no one reads, you know?
I had an amazing creative writing teacher in Nashville, Tennessee, named Bill Brown at Hume Fogg High School. And if there's anyone from Nashville, you know who he is. And I saw Jeff in the comments. And you know, I get really sad knowing that these programs are kind of leaving high schools right now. But I had 2 years of intensive creative writing, and he was kind of a beat poet, and knew Ginsberg and knew those cats, and he just kind of changed my life. And I'll never forget when he would read us Young Lee and Sharon Olds for the first time, and I was like, what the heck is this thing? You know, like, because at that time we had been reading like, you know, Chaucer and Shakespeare, which those are like cool, but they didn't really speak to me. And he just kind of showed me contemporary poems that kind of lit me on fire at a young age. And I think when you're younger and you don't feel like you're good at anything, and you find this container that feels really powerful and it helps you translate really difficult, hard to handle, hard to hold emotions, it feels like a superpower at a young age. But I didn't know at that time I could do anything with poetry. I didn't know that you could have a vocation in it. So I went off and did other things, but poetry was still something I did very privately, until I literally Googled like poetry career, and I saw these things called MFA programs, and I was like, what is it? Wait, there's graduate programs that will pay you to read and write poetry. And of course, you know, I had to choose the most difficult one, Vanderbilt. I didn't get in the first time, so anyone that's out there that's applying to MFA programs, like, keep trying. And I applied again 3 years later. I got in, and I'll actually never forget, just a shout out to Edgar, they always send like really sweet emails to the new recruits, and Edgar just sent me the kindest, sweetest, most generous email, just like welcoming me. And just, being really just generous. And I think that kind of kindness you can see for him on and off the page. So that always meant a lot to me. So.
Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt your discussion, but that was really enlightening. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Now I'm thinking about poets like Lee Young Lee, who like, I think for some people he must feel desperately sentimental. He's so committed to the abstraction. He's so committed to talking about like the heart and love and passion, right? But I find him so moving. And I don't know, there's something about there are these poets that can get away with cutting to the core, right? What I mean is like cutting to the essential human struggles, right? Like I'm thinking of Jack Gilbert as one of those poets too, right? Where he's not afraid to say, the heart, and love, and I don't know. I wonder if we're so guarded against sentimentality as contemporary poets that we're missing out on poems that are, I don't know, that have such an intense depth of feeling and a directness, right? This is what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about trying to live a life where I'm feeling at the utmost, right?
We've both read Madness, Black and Honey. I mean, Mary chapter that's so good. It's hard though. We're both professors now, and it's really hard because like we see those words in our script, like love and best. And I think you can do anything in a poem if you do it well. And I think Jack Gilbert is a great example of a poet that risks sentimentality and it actually pays off. And I think he's a really good poet that can write about something really vague in a really precise way, but it's actually extremely difficult to do.
Totally. Yeah. It helps me. I don't know. I've been trying to gather my thoughts about this. I feel like sentimentality is actually just a kind of lying about feeling, right? Like when we say something is sentimental, what we actually mean is you're simplifying the complex landscape or the confluence of emotions that you're actually trying to get at, right? And so I'm starting to feel like using abstractions like that, saying love or death or whatever, is fine as long as as long as like the thinking that comes alongside it is complex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But also it's thrilling to see people get away with stuff that you feel like they shouldn't be able to get away with.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like though we have these kind of conventions around what a poem should or shouldn't do, and I'm in this new phase, and like the first one I read, I'm into bringing all the poetry rules right now. Like I don't care. Like
totally.
I wanna be really rebellious and kind of buck against those things, and I think sometimes there's a sense of like order or sense of like class that can come into play of like what's allowed in a poem and who gets to break those rules, and so. What does it mean to be sentimental in a space where you're allowed to kind of like break those conventions? It's something I'm kind of interested in exploring right now. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
There are a couple more questions. Yeah. One says, Tiana, do things like joy or reverence come naturally, or do you have to push your poems towards them?
Oh, that's a really good question. Actually, I was talking to Edgar about this earlier, that we both kind of have some violent landscapes in both of our works. I was actually talking to a friend earlier today on a walk about, this first book was, I think first books are often this autobiographical impulse for a lot of early writers. It definitely was for me. There was a lot of trauma, a lot of pain, and a lot of, and after talking about the book on tour and having to talk about these things, it's very heavy. I mean, I think as poets, we're kind of conjurers and we get possessed by these things. And when they leave us, we're really drained, I think. So definitely the second book, I'm actually kind of pushing my poems more towards joy because I want to believe that I, number one, hopefully can possess that a little bit more than the pain. And it's something that I think I had more in graduate school, was kind of like flogging myself. I felt like I had to flog myself a little bit for art. And that maybe sounds contrived, but I think I had a little bit of a sackcloth and ash kind of view about researching a lot of, my major was basically slavery. I mean, you can't research slavery and not feel those things. And so I'm thinking about this quote from Ralph Ellison where he talks about the blues impulse, and he said it's fingering the jagged grain and hope. And he's talking about pain, but at the end of the quote, he talks about, but maybe transcendence. And that day, like, can I even transcend pain? Am I allowed to do that? And it's a kind of essential question in these next poems that I'm working on, that I'm actually trying to usher in a little bit more joy. I think Ross Gay is a poet that does that for me, Gabrielle Cavalcaresi, Danica, and like, I think a poem about joy can be just as political. It can be just as kind of, yeah, it can be actually just as political as a poem that's like directly dealing with race and history. And so I think I am now pushing more towards joy. I think I'm generally, though, pretty a melancholic person, and I tend to kind of barrel the drain of sadness pretty often. So it isn't natural for me, but I'm working on it. So yeah.
Connor wants to know about writing long poems, what rules you can break.
Hey, Connor. Yeah, I guess I'll go first. Yeah, I've started to write longer poems, but they're just a function of trying to write unpunctuated poems, and so it's a trick. It's a trick to get myself to keep going. And I think you see it in the book. I'm a chiseler by nature, right? When I write a poem, I get a draft of it down. I get to a point where I think, okay, maybe I've reached some insight or some sort of stopping point, and then I get time. The fragment used to really excite me. It still does, right? But the fragment used to really excite me because it felt like, one, I was breaking a rule, right? I was breaking the rule that we have to write incomplete sentences. But also it felt like I was getting away with slowing down time just through the syntax of the poem, right? Just the way that I was constructing the sentences. And that was really exciting to me. So when you read Tap Out, it's like 75% fragments, I imagine. And then the new poems are trying to tap into sort of the opposite energy, where the lack of punctuation means the poem happens very, very, very quickly, right? Time speeds up. There's a kind of hurdle. It shuts down this part of my brain that's like, not going to put that in the poem, not going to put that in the poem. Everything gets to come into the poem because we're moving too fast to stop and differentiate between the things that might come in. Yeah, so I don't know. It's an exciting energy to try to surf. I found that it's sneaking into every single poem that I write. And so then I need to ask myself, well, does the content of the poem actually merit this strategy, right? Like, is this headlong energy suiting what I'm actually trying to do in the poem? And the answer is not always yes, obviously, right? So there have been some poems where I've had to revise out of that style and into something closer to the style that I'm doing in a lot of Tap Out.
Well, our time is almost up. So just as a last question, what are you guys reading now, or what would you recommend other people read now in quarantine times? What are you reaching out for?
Yeah, so I have a couple books. I've been kind of rereading Bluets by Maggie Nelson. Loneliness, solitude with a problem. And so if you're lonely and you love Maggie Nelson and just blue things, this is the book for you. I also wanted 2 new books that just recently came out. Meg Wade's Slick Like Dark, it's her new chapbook. It's amazing. And also Katie Condon.
Hey.
No, Katie just started reading here. Really recent books I'm really excited about. And then a classic, I traded favorite books with a friend, and so he read Sula, and then I'm reading Moby Dick right now. Never read it, so it seemed like the pandemic would be a great time to confront
a lot of long books. You've got time for them now, yeah. How about you, Edgar?
Yeah, one of the best books published last year, I think, is by Dorianne Laux, and it's called Only as the Day is Long. It's her selected poems. It's fantastic. I am of the opinion that Dorianne Laux is an underappreciated American poet, an underrated American poet. I think she's phenomenal. She's one of the best poets writing today. I also want to recommend Outline by Rachel Cusk, kind of an experimental novel, really plain, but really exquisite. I found myself moved almost against my will reading it, and it's one of the best novels I've read recently. Also, a student put me on. It's stacked under my computer right now, so I can't show you. But it's called Short. It's an anthology of short stories, prose poems, brief essays, and it says and other short prose forms. It's put out by Persia Books. It's definitely worth having a look if you're interested in the short form. And then yesterday I started reading Tanan Bambrick's book Vantage, which I really like. It's about a young woman who's working on a garbage crew cleaning up a state park, a reservoir, I think.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both so much for joining us. It was awesome to have you. I really enjoyed your readings, and everybody should tune in again next week at the same time for more poetry. See you all then.
Thank you, cool. Awesome to be with you, Edgar.
Yeah, totally. See ya.